Okay, good. We are ready to get started. You guys ready?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know we're in three different zones as we're having this conversation. Um, I'd like to thank Mila, Richa, and Pratap for joining us on this panel on a very interesting conversation that we're going to be having. Very difficult for many. It's really about talking about mental well-being and how we're starting to transition to start talking about such a topic. And I know that personally, this has been an interesting story for me, and why I've built out my organization and why we're starting out with this discussion based on personal reasons, but also something that has happened in terms of when organizations actually talk about mental health, but don't necessarily have the support associated with providing that piece. And I've said it before, and I have had a chance to talk to both Mila, well, not both, all of the three of them, Mila, Pratap, and Richa, about how this has been a significant part of being mentally uh, present to be able to perform in your day-to-day life, whether it's in your work environment, whether it's in your personal environment. It's about being able to do that. So thank you, everybody. We'll get started right away. We've got about 90 minutes and we've got a lot of questions, and I'll be honest with you, we're not even covering the details of things by the questions that we're getting. This topic is very in-depth, and this is the start of a series that we're going to be working on for now until the end of the year. And I'll explain a little bit later on towards the end about what we intend to do with this discussions and how we are moving this from discussion phase to actually doing something about this and addressing some of the challenges. And everybody will get an opportunity to be part of that piece if you choose to be there. So let's start off. Thank you everybody for coming and joining us today. I know there might be a few more people that pop in at a later time. But let's get the story started. And let's start with Mila. Tell us briefly about yourself and your role in the field of mental health.
Okay, thank you, Philip, for this opportunity. And I cannot answer this question without telling my personal and professional story. So as you might know from my profile that I shared on LinkedIn, as of 2020, I'm a career development practitioner. I work with immigrants. I help them with their job search. But actually, I'm an immigrant and I came to Canada in 2012 as an international student. And so from my kind of personal experience as a job seeker, I remember that when I started looking for a job and I had all the tools, so my college wonderfully prepared me for the job search. I had all the resumes, cover letters, I practiced all interview techniques, but I just remember there were days that I just couldn't, I didn't have any energy to do anything. So I just wondered what's going on with me. So it was I felt really, really miserable. So, I mean, I just couldn't push myself. It was really, really frustrating. And well, later on, I found out that I was clinically depressed. So this is how I started thinking about mental health and how it affects us. And then I got my very first job in Canada by volunteering with immigrant serving agencies. So, and I started having conversations with my clients who are also job seekers. And I found out that almost every single one of them, they had some sort of mental health challenges, issues, because mindset in a job search, this is essential. This is what I kind of figured out from all the conversation that I was having with my clients. And and especially with immigrant job seekers, it was either two things. It was either like negative thinking, so they were grieving some opportunity that never happened to them in their home countries, or it was an extreme anxiety because of uncertainty, because of unknown future. And like job search, like to be honest, it's 90% rejection. So you have to have like a certain mindset, because you will be dealing with this every day. You will be sending all these applications, all these resumes. You have to be prepared. So like mentally, you have to be ready for this. So, and also I was lucky. I was working in Toronto back then, and here in Edmonton, I work with Edmonton Mennonite Center for Newcomers. So I was lucky that our organizations, we had actually free services for counseling. So I sent quite a few clients. This is why I'm a big believer in holistic approach, because it's not that easy as you come to a career coach and you just make the resume. So you have to unpack certain things. You have to unpack all this negative thinking. So, and I like talk a lot about self-care with my clients, because this is essential step, because you cannot move on into your job search and then like you cannot be successful and productive in your professional life without addressing any like mental health issues that you have. So I see myself as a advocate for mental health, and I talk about it openly. I've been in therapy myself, and like for instance, now I run a youth employment program in my organization, and we always start our conversation before even going into like resume writing. We always start with addressing some negative thinking, like what are your negative beliefs. So I'm not a specialist, I'm not a therapist, but I can kind of see, because like in some like critical situations, we could not even move on before person addresses their, you know, like mental health issues. Yeah, so this is my story.
Thank you, Mila. Pratap, would you like to share what your story has been and what made you get into the field of mental health?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Just first of all, big shout out to all of you. Thank you for raising the dialogue on this, and I'm pleased to be part of this dialogue. So thank you for that, Alex. So briefly about myself, I think on paper, I have qualified as an engineer and a consultant. However, what got me interested into the field of mental health is mainly because recently, over the last 7 years, I've been very, very involved in the self-development industry as an executive coach, as a mentor. And I've had the pleasure of navigating several entrepreneurs and career professionals through their life trajectories. I think what that's taught me and made me realize the importance of is everyone comes with a certain set of perspectives, a certain set of belief systems, values that tend to define what happens around them. And I was fascinated by the fact that someone's state of mind can really make a big impact on the communications they have, on life events around them. And if you're able to focus in on your mental state and actually make shifts in it at will, it's actually quite a very, very important tool to be able to use to actually change your life trajectory. So I come in from a perspective of initially that of a peak performance coach, someone who wants to help people accelerate their careers or who wants to grow their businesses and grow their incomes. Whilst that was typically the focus with my background as a management consultant, I started to pick up on themes that Mila has just mentioned, which is for change to happen, there are a number of intersecting and interconnecting aspects across various parts of life. So when we decided to help people transform their lives, we couldn't just focus on one vein, which is either career or your business or your relationships. It had to be across the board. And that's what drew me closer and closer to the aspect of just well-being in general, of which mental health is a big part of it. And I can go into more and more detail, but I think I'll stop there just to say that that's what got interested me into this domain. And I feel like there are many layers to uncover here. So yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Pratap. And I'll put my 2 cents in after we've gone to have Richa in as well to share her story of what's driven her to move into the field of mental health. Richa, it's all yours.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you for actually bringing up this important topic and starting this conversation and having this discussion, right? For me, I think like Pratap did mention about himself, I'm an engineer myself. And to be honest, when I was at college, which is more than 12, 13 years back, it was a personal experience that happened in my life. A friend of mine committed suicide because somewhere she anticipated maybe she might not get a good placement, right? And I think somehow, especially in India, people link the success of their college life to a placement or job opportunity that they get back while they are in the campus. I think she anticipated this even before a single company had really come for campus placement. She thought and she took this step, right? I think that was a recession time. The Lehman Brothers and etc. collapsed. We were all going through a lot of pressure. But I think culturally in our society, there's so much stigma about seeking psychological help that none of us had the courage to sort of go out and seek support. Saying, what will others think of me, right? People might make fun of me that, hey, what's wrong with you? I think seeking mental health support is somewhere equated to being mad or being insane. I think that's the point that got me intrigued into the subject. I wanted to know, why are people not seeking support? Who are these mental health professionals? What do they do? You know, and just to gain more insights into it. And that's how my journey started. As an organization, so I run this organization called Your Dost. Dost in Hindi means friend. It's like your friend. I think we said if we could combine technology, which is probably at the fingertips of everyone these days, we might be able to help and support a lot of people before things got severe. And with that, we started out Your Dost as a technology platform where people could be anonymous. A person can call themselves Superman, Batman, Supergirl, whatever they like, so that they're anonymous. It allows them to hide their identity and seek support from professionals. We have 1,000+ trained professionals as a part of our team, who are psychologists, counselors, career coaches, life coaches, and people can really have a one-on-one conversation with them right at the click of the button, right, from wherever they are. It could be video, it could be telephonic. I think lots of youngsters these days prefer chat as a medium. We do have some face-to-face facility also, but I think at least in our cultures, somehow going to a therapist has always been, unless it's been so severe that you really have to go see someone, people have hesitated from it. And I think the whole idea was, how do we make it easy to use? How do we make it more accessible, available, so that it encourages more people to sort of come out, experience support, we become the mental health champion, and that's how the conversations can start.
I should unmute myself when I have this conversation as well. So I'm going to throw out a poll for all the attendees here. I want you to go through that, and while you're doing the poll, I will share a little bit about my story as well. So you should have a poll that's popped up for you. Go ahead and fill in. That includes the speakers as well. I think I relate to all three of you as you've been starting to down this pathway of mental health. I don't come from an engineering background, but I know Pratap and myself were in the alumni of the same university, are alumni of the same university, and that's how we've established a story among ourselves. But I went through a phase where I was looking at change in my relationship status. I went through some health issues, and I lost my job, all happening in a period of 1 year. and I considered myself a very smart person, and it was interesting to see that people didn't value me anymore in whether it's a relationship, whether it's my own personal health, or even my work environment. And when we consider ourselves as a social entity, we want to be we want to be part of, we want to fit into society, and that includes our friends, our work environment, and our relationships. And when you find that you're at that point where everything's crashing, it takes a real effect on yourself personally, because you start questioning your existence. And I know, Richa, you talked about suicide and all those things. I know I've sat on the steps of my on my staircase and looked and said, why do I exist? Why am I here today? Why am I here to move forward? And so I totally understand that, your mind can put you into such diverse depths of turmoil, and you start questioning things. And that's really why I wanted to start this conversation. And we've got some people out here that have been stepping into that world and trying to provide platforms and support services for things to come into play. So in talking with this topic, let's really start understanding the basics of what mental health means. So there are many views and opinions about mental illnesses, their causes, and how we can best treat and respond to these situations and conditions. The following discussion is to provide some context and understanding to everybody out here to understand what mental health means and what does it mean across the globe, because every one of you touch base, and I even picked most of you because of you've got a diverse background. Mila has a background from Europe, but in the Canadian context. Pratap has a background from India, the Middle East, and working in UK. And Richa, you're in India. And the culture and the way that things come into play a huge role in how we respond to things. So we're going to start with you, Pratap, on this question. What does mental health mean to you, and us as a community?
Sure. Thanks for that. So I think mental health to me really relates to someone. I think we've heard this term quite spoken very widely in these days in the context of again, I'm coming from a self-development background. There are these terms called mindfulness, self-awareness, being in the right state of consciousness, and these are all terms that are used, bandied about quite a bit. So to me personally, I'm not a clinical psychotherapist or psychologist. However, one thing I forgot to add about where I come from is, the Progressive Academy. We look at coming up with advanced techniques and methodology that almost explores the fringes of where these terms come from, which is consciousness, mindfulness, etc. And we look at being able to come up with solutions that are quite complex, rooted in quite complex theory, but make it simple and accessible for individuals. So when you ask me about what I think about mental health, I think it comes down to a few factors of someone being able to understand why they think the way they think in a particular context or a scenario, and how they're able to understand their own perspective and understand other people's perspectives as well, and know the interplay between that. And also, there are a whole host of other life conditions that come into play, which is, geopolitical, socioeconomic, your cultures, your traditions, your values. All these coming together make a massive impact on someone's state of mind, regardless of where they are or where they've come from. And a lot of these factors impact mental health. So in my mind, someone who is able to, mental health in that way is a topic that is quite important, because people need to be able to know where they stand at which point in time. And as a community, it's important for us to know what are the symptoms or signs that someone may be suffering from some sort of a mental health disorder or health illness. And the idea here is for us as a community to be able to wake up and see the signs. And in some cases, they're quite difficult to make out. So it requires us to have that kind of mindset to be able to be inquisitive, care about people, and also start to ask questions and not fear what someone's reaction might be. And also, of course, with that, the ability to be able to engage in that dialogue. So as a community, I think we need to start getting better at the commonly nuanced aspects of life, which is, if you're a man, you behave in this way. You need to be tough and strong. If you're a woman, it's okay to cry. This is one aspect that I've come across. This is quite common. There's another aspect of, no matter what happens, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. So these are all statements that underscore you being able to be resilient at all costs at any time. And what this tends to leave community along the lines of is point out the people who are suffering, who are open about it, and who share it, to be labeled as weaker, or in some sense even inferior. And I think that's a big problem with us as a community that affects not just people individually, but because I come from a commercial background, or an entrepreneurial and a corporate background, 6 in 10 workers here in the UK are affected by mental health, right? 60% of the people live in fear of being judged, right? That's a huge amount. And the total cost of mental health illnesses and the treatment of the aspect behind that almost equate. And also, one more thing I came across as I was researching this topic was,
I think we might have lost Pratap
these
here.
organizations that actually prioritize mental health actually outperform others by 10%, which is also another factor that we have to consider, because I look at community, we make lost achievement. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can right now.
Hi, is this better?
Yeah, this is a lot better.
Okay. I think I was just finishing up anyway, which is, as a community, we tend to get lost in the aspects of achievement, competition, and trying to win the race. And very often we forget that we are social beings, and we need different aspects of love, care, compassion, and a very common term that's meant to replace competition, which is collaboration. So I think these are some important points that we need to consider. Both, I found this very, very important and helpful in the people that I've helped, but also as a community, I find that you notice certain patterns when these are the building blocks or the value systems that underpin organizations or communities. They do tend to lead more contented, and again, success is a relative term, but successful in their own eyes. So I'll stop with that, because I could go on.
Okay, thank you, Pratap, for your take on this. Richa, tell me, what does mental health mean to you and as a community?
Right. Alex, for me, mental health is equivalent to well-being, right? That being in that state where you feel purposeful, you are able to feel happy, you're able to feel content. You even if there are stressors, right? If there is going to be stressors, nobody thought about COVID. There are numbers are rising. There could be people suffering in the family, but to be able to have that capacity to manage that stress, bounce back from the failure, I think that's how I would relate a good, sound mental health or a well-being to be, right? I think I would go with some of the Pratap's point. I think, especially in India, mental health is not as important as physical well-being, right? The way I look at it is how we all go to a gym or a run not because we have like a fever or a diarrhea or a malaria, right? We go there because we want to be better. Similarly, can people start taking care of their emotional well-being, right? Can they take care of their emotional well-being such that they could be a better version of themselves, right? From being more confident to being more resilient to being more happy, right? And as a culture that we are in, I think we are So India ranks highest in terms of depression, second in terms of anxiety, right? This WHO report which says 1 out of every 4 Indian goes through some sort of mental unrest. 42.5% corporate India goes through moderate depression. There is 39% of students at Indian University go through stress. So it's a large population, right? But we don't want to talk about it. There's somewhere the word mental health gets related to being mad, right? And there's a lot of, which is not true, right? It's a spectrum from a mild to a moderate to a severe. It's a huge spectrum. People on the severe side might be very, very little. And probably if we can intervene while it's moderate, mild and moderate, probably a lot of them might not even go to severe, right? I think you guys have lived here. You would have seen as a culture, we don't talk about, I think we are not encouraged to talk about our feelings and emotions, right? It's like, if it's a like, I think Pratap did mention, if it's a male, it's, seeking support is a sign of weakness. If you're a male, you need to be in a certain way. If you're a female, you need to be in a certain way. This is how you need to be competitive, which might not be true, right? I think the timeline or the journey of life that maybe Mila has versus I have, with you have, might be very different, right? And that's all okay. As long as you feel content, you feel happy, I think that's completely okay. So I think that would be my take on it, Alex, saying, I think for me, a good mental health is about well-being. It's about you. We all know when we feel that happy, content, purposeful. It's about finding that balance where we say, I feel happy, and that might not be the same for you. That might not be the same for me, but that's okay, right? You and I are two different people, and we could have two different paths. I think that's how I would look at it.
Okay, thank you, and I'll touch base on that in a little bit. But Mila, on to you to tell me what your thoughts are on mental health and what you think our role is as a community.
Well, maybe I have a very kind of like a narrow perspective because I've met like hundreds of people, job seekers. So like I look at it as a like career development perspective. And what I observed and what I believe in, I think that mental health starts with self-awareness. Because I can tell you, I had conversations with people from all over the world, different countries, and I can assure you that we're not taught to reflect on our experiences. We never ask this question: who I am, what do I like, what I don't like, what do I feel, why do I feel this way, what are my triggers? So these are questions that like because with my kind of first conversation with the client, because I really like getting to know this person, I immediately start like diving in because like I believe that self-reflection is essential. So, and it actually sets people off, like any of this question, like what do you like or what you don't like about your job? Like, I mean, do you feel happy? So because people just, they maybe choose like different motivation to pursue some careers. So they follow someone else's dreams. So I can talk a lot about like separation from parents, because people are living up like their like parents' dream, or they just don't know that like other options exist. So like this self-discovery, self-awareness, like I think it's really important to start your kind of mental health from this place. Like, what do I want? Do I like it? So I learned this technique from my therapist. So like if you like if you don't know how do you feel, you just set up an alarm every 3 hours and you ask myself, how do I feel? What do I want? So this is how you develop awareness. So it starts from like very small steps. Then the other thing about mental health for me, it's about actions. Because like once you went through this kind of self-awareness, self-reflection phase, it's about actions, and it's about admitting that yes, I'm only human and I'm vulnerable. And I talk about vulnerability a lot because again, job search, this is where you want other people to see you, and you have to really show up and be vulnerable, because we're not perfect. And for some people, it's really it's a lot of shame, it's a lot of different feelings, you know. So and so speaking about actions, so the very powerful question that I learned from one of the greatest cognitive behavioral therapists, Robert Leahy: what I can do right now. So what can I do about this right now? So because this psychologist, his specialization is in depression. So when people, they just have like no capacity, they're so low, they feel so they have like no energy. So this question, I think it's really powerful, because when you kind of feel stuck, it's really important to ask, like, what, like, yes, things are bad, but what, maybe there is one thing that I can do about it. So self-awareness, actions, and seeking help. I mean, this is one of the biggest things. Again, it all comes, like, you have to admit that, okay, I have some issue, and then admit that I'm only human, I'm vulnerable, and go and seek help. And as a community, I think that we should do better in telling real life stories, because seriously, I think it's a trend all over the world. So we're all just sick and tired of this, I call it like successful success stories, like, you know, like things were bad, and then like 10 years later, I'm all successful. But no, I want to know what happened. Like I want to know how you overcame it, you know. And I think that we all as a community should share a message that it's okay to be not okay. This is, I think, that was everyone is kind of secretly craving. And so I know that in Canada they have a mental health month. It's May, so you can see social media like flooding with all the messages, with hashtags and everything. But I think it should be every day. So some people would say that, oh, like we talk a lot like about mental health, and we're just tired. Some people feel they just don't understand like why we're talking about this, because it's such an uncomfortable topic. But I think, and I don't know if you heard, so back in April in Nova Scotia, we had the deadliest mass shooting in Canada. And so according to some articles, some research, so the person who did it had some unaddressed mental health issues. So in my opinion, we could prevent this if, you know, if we had more awareness, or if this person seeked mental health. So this is the conversation that we should be having.
Thank you, Mila. Really appreciate that, all three of you, because I could relate personally to everything that all of you were saying in so many lenses, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about it, because the question that Mila you brought up is you'd actually mentioned about being vulnerable, but also asking that question about who am I? And I know that, and that's a challenge that I would give to everybody that's on this conversation, Anderson, is try and ask that question to yourself. Who are you? And take away different aspects of it, because don't define yourself as being an architect or an engineer or by your career. Try and avoid elements of those things, and then try and find out who you are truly. And you will see. And I struggled with it. I'll be honest with you. I really struggled with it when I lost my job, because all of a sudden I'm going like, okay, who am I? And I was like, well, I'm no longer a branch manager. I'm no longer the architect. I'm no longer defined by my career. I really need to tap into who I am as a person now and try and understand myself. And it was a huge struggle. It took me months to actually try and define who I am. It started getting into values and a lot of those elements, and you really start digging in. So I challenge all of you just to take away that professional piece away from your definition of who you are, and try and understand who you truly are. whether you're as a parent or as a person, but really get into the depth of things. And so that's one of the things that I would say as that part of what can I do right now. Try and answer that question about who you are, and see how that takes you down a path of self-reflection and self-awareness. So we touched a little bit about this in some of the conversations, but I'm really going to get into the depth around it, because we're talking about a topic that is a stigma for many pieces. It's a stigma for people. It's a stigma for countries. It's a stigma for cultures. I want to know what are the attitudes around mental health problems that you find prevalent in your respective countries, as well as the cultures that you've been part of. And I'm actually going to start with Pratap. You may want to unmute yourself and start with your thoughts around this. And it's really having that conversation around how do we end the stigma.
Yeah, very, very relevant point here. I think so. When you look at it from a cultural perspective, it adds many more dimensions to it. So again, I'm from India, a southern state in India called Kerala. I lived in the Middle East. And then I came here and went back to India for a while, and then came here to the UK. Yes, I've traveled to a few countries here in Europe and the US, and I find that I think generally about most of the people, these kind of issues are normally hushed under the table, or they're dealt with in private. And that's okay. I guess in some cases it's okay, because some people like to deal with it privately because they don't want to make a big show and tell of it, and they like to deal with their issues by themselves. Now, there's a thin line between someone's personal privacy versus the culture being more accepting of talking about this or sharing through this. And I want to link back to a couple of points we made earlier. Excuse me for the sound around. I think we have a storm around the corner. I think we're whipping up a storm in our conversation anyway. So anyway, so I think the point I'm trying to make here is there are some unwritten rules that are there behind every culture, and how we start to conduct ourselves as individuals, and how we address this point of mental health. Now, mental health as a term was not very widely known until recently. And I think the more and more we're finding the effect of what we call the rat race, or what we call the fact that a lot of people find the need to appear to be successful, rather than perhaps delving into their own minds and finding out what does success actually mean to them. And it's very, very interesting to note there's this man in the early 40s or 50s. His name was Earl Nightingale, and he's got a lot of wisdom to share on this. He talks about success being a progressive realizations of one's worthy ideals, or working towards a worthy cause. Now, there are so many variables in that term, in the sense that what is a worthy ideal? What's a worthy cause? And a lot of that is defined by what the people around you think of it as worthy, or respectable, or amazing to chase after or to become. And I think, coming from an Indian perspective, Indian background, I know that a lot of this was maybe before, it's changing now. A lot of the onus was on certain key professions to be chosen and seen as being in the limelight, or having made it, or being successful. And I think that eliminates people from exercising one of the most important faculties, which is their own mind. So from an early age, people who are perhaps not given the option or the freedom to express themselves, or to look at different options that might be helpful for them, they tend to go into certain, what we call, boxes. And this is something I've seen very, very commonly and faced very strongly in the people I work with here in the UK. They've been either professionals, entrepreneurs, or people in the social or charitable sectors. These terms like the glass ceiling, or the brick wall, when it comes to being able to take your business to the next level, these are all coming up with constructs that are built up in the mind. And I might be going a bit technical here, but there are certain aspects that cause the mind to be in what we call three states. Either you're open, or you're closed, or you're arrested. And I think because of, and why I mention these terms is because I've found one's upbringing, the parenting that goes into it, the culture and the traditions and the values that are around you can either cause you to stay closed or arrested, which is closed to new ideas, knowing that only one way is the right way, or arrested as in, I'm not going to listen to anything else. This is what it is. And I think this is successful. This is what I'm going for. Very, it's very rarely you come across people with completely open mindsets who are very teachable and open and flexible to new ways of working, new ways of thinking. So I think this is beyond culture. This is more of kind of going into how you go into education. And the education part of it is quite important to me because I'm a director of an academy, and we actually shape and design programs that are designed specifically to help people come out of the boxes that they put themselves in. And a lot of that is dependent upon people actually understanding the periphery of the box they're in. So anyone who's seen the movie The Truman Show will know what I'm talking about. At the end of the movie, he realizes he's actually in a set that's constructed for him, and his life is constructed for him. And he starts to, it's only when you start to become more aware of certain patterns that are repeating in your mind, which are what we call neural pathways in your brain. That's what really starts to get people to understand, oh, when I'm faced with a certain set of stimuli, this is my response to it because I've been conditioned to this, to reacting in a certain way or coming up with certain judgments at certain junctures. So yeah, I mean, I could go on about this, but I think I'm going to pause there by just saying, I think transcending the cultural aspect, there is an aspect of education that has been put onto us as a result of what we call the Industrial Revolution, and the education system being designed to produce worker bees and not thinkers or entrepreneurs. And I think we need to be able to, through our education, free people's mindsets by making them more entrepreneurial. This doesn't mean that everyone needs to start a business. You could be an entrepreneur in an organization as well. So I'm gonna pause there. I think you may be on mute,
Yeah, thank you, Pratap. I think you touched on a few things, and I've taken notes on it. I'm going to get to Richa to answer the question as well. So again, it's about what are the attitudes of mental health that you find prevalent in your respective countries and the culture that you've been exposed to.
Right. So thank you for that, Pratap. I think you covered it quite well. I don't think I have much to add to it, but I think in the culture that I come from, and I think a lot of you have some exposure to that as well, this is not considered to be an issue. Let's start with that, right? It's not even important. You go for a run, have some good food. It's just an excuse you're making, right? You don't want to do your work. That's why you're creating this as an excuse. So I think we're freeing the mind, saying, I think very clearly it's conditioned that these are certain things that you should do if you want to be successful. To be successful, these are the colleges you should go through, these are the kind of jobs you should do, this is the kind of person you should marry, and that's about it, right? And you're successful. It's like a formula being created. So I think that is what is prevalent in our culture, which needs to change, and I think it has started to change. I think in India, for any change to happen, it requires three pillars to talk about it. One is Bollywood, another is cricket, and third is politics, right? And luckily at all three levels, this has been picked up. We always say, I think with the whole coronavirus thing happening, I think it's maturing the curve faster. People are realizing the importance of emotional well-being, how it can impact them. I'm always surprised. So we do work at Yodos. We've worked with around 2 million people by now. We work with some of the largest universities of the country, some of the most premier institutes of the country, some of the very good corporates of the country. And time and again, having these conversations with some of these very, very senior folks in these organizations or institutions where they would say things like, in our college, maybe once for 2 days, 5 student might be stressed in a college of 20,000 people. I'm talking about, right? Which is just not even possible. And when you look at when we start our engagement with them, they are surprised to see the number of students actually coming out and seeking support. And I think the fact that they could be anonymous, it's available 24/7, I think it allows them to sort of just go out and seek support, right? So a lot of things where in our culture where I think there's a lot of global data which says more women go through mental health issues or seek support about it. Whereas because it's an online emotional wellness platform which is anonymous, we do see more male coming out and seeking support. Because like I think Pratap said, we have been boxed like men don't cry and men don't talk about their feelings. But I think when they're anonymous, it allows them to talk about their feelings. Right. So definitely, I think it needs to start at that level. I think the only way to do it is through education. And I think the way Meena had beautifully put, I think it's about telling everyone that we are humans and humans are vulnerable. That's why we are humans. We go through ups and downs in our life and it's completely okay. It's not a mold that we need to grow into. We could have like enabling people to have those thinking, right? That's okay to think freely. Somebody might start a job at 22, somebody might start at 23, somebody might start at 28. And that's all okay, right? It doesn't matter. It's your own clock that you're running with, right? It doesn't matter. So I think that needs to happen, that education right from the very beginning, that it's okay to talk about feelings and emotions. We are vulnerable. It's okay to seek support at times. We don't have all the answers. To reflect on ourselves. It's not only about the grades that you're getting or it's not only about the job that you've got, but it's about a lot more, right? Do you really enjoy doing that? Do you really feel purposeful being there? Right? And that's how people will not burst. I think you would have seen like people end up yelling more at roads than they would actually talk about their feelings to anyone, because that's just easier. Right? We have been brought in that culture where we don't talk about our feelings and emotions, and that just comes out on some stranger that we think will not give it back to us. So I think that the education from the very beginning, from being a child to like in the schools, in the colleges, and actually encouraging people to talk about it, right? When they talk about it, one way of dealing with it, I mean, like I'm saying, we work with a lot of corporates, and when somebody's actually opening up about it, the manager would say things like, oh, you're not too stressed, this means you're not working hard. Now, that's not a good culture that you're cultivating, right? You need to give due importance to emotional well-being. I think for us, it needs to start at that level. The conversations where Bollywood, cricket, and politics side, like I said, has started, but I think it needs to get better and better. To make it mainstream. I think we are very far away from being mainstream. Definitely the curve is maturing faster, but it has a long way to go. I hope that answers the question.
Yep, thank you very much, Richa. There's no right and wrong answers for any of these things. We're talking about a discussion that people have different opinions, and I'll just bring it up here is just as Mila's setting up to answer the question is, even though I shared the questions with the people out here, the panelists, you will see that they are coming with different perspectives. No one actually talked to each other, and you're seeing how unique this perspectives are coming in from different angles. And I think that's the strength in this conversation, is being able to come in from different angles and understand this from in different levels. So Mila, tell us what your experience has been around the attitudes around mental health here in Canada, and even your exposure back in Europe. So.
Well, I feel torn because I think that I can only speak about my Russian culture because, well, I came to Canada, I was 24 years old. So I grew up in this culture, so I know like how people perceive, even conversations about mental health, and I will talk a little bit about Canada. So I will tell you like maybe some like average perception of like Eastern European about like mental health. So I think that a lot of people, they actually mix up like therapy, like counseling, and seeing a psychiatrist, like, because they say like, oh, you seen a therapist, like you're crazy. So this is like immediately, this is what will come out. So other people will say that I don't need a therapist, I can just talk to my friends. This is a very common perception. And of course, if you admit that you're in therapy, be prepared to be, you know, like shamed. People will say that you're like crazy. So people do not publicly admit that they're in therapy. So, and for me, I find it really kind of funny, because I know for sure some of my close friends and even my family members who go and seek mental help, but they would not admit it to each other. So like, I'm the only one who will like say, hey, I will share it on social media, I will admit it to my clients, because I don't think that this is shame. So maybe I'm an exception, and I can say that it's slowly changing right now. But again, I'd like to say that, for instance, I follow like social media in Russia, and of course I want to be surrounded by like-minded people. So for instance, what I have in my circle, these are very open-minded people, and I can see that, okay, something is changing. So people are starting to talk about it, but I can tell that this is a rare exception. So on the other hand, in Canada and here, I might be biased, because all my working experience was in a nonprofit environment, and my organizations, because we work with immigrants and we embrace holistic approach. So, but my understanding that in Canada, even from like some campaigns on social media, this is more kind of open. The conversation is more open from my kind of perspective. But again, I'm very biased, because my experience, like I've never worked in business. So I have some friends who work in like a business in a corporate environment. No, because when I tell stories about like our organization, so we have like, you know, very like honest conversations with our management. We, you know, we have workshops about stress management and stuff. And people who work in business, like as Philippe told, like, no, it's just not happening. So it's very, I think it's very, in Canada, it's very diverse, and it's very different depending on your sector, depending on your organization. But one thing I was kind of wanted to illustrate the difference between like Canada and, for instance, Russia. So as you know, in March, we all transitioned from working in the office to working from home. So for instance, I run the youth employment program. So starting from March 16th, I started working from home. And then by the end of March, our funder, she approached me and she said like, okay, so the report was due, but she specifically asked me and my coworker how we were doing kind of on a personal level, how is our mental health. So she specifically asked for that. But in a contrast, my parents in Russia, they both work in universities, and they did the same switch from, you know, from the classroom to working from home. No one ever asked them like any questions, like whatsoever. So I think it kind of illustrates like it's expected from you. So we don't care how you feel, like you know, you just have to do it. Like everyone suffers, you know. It's kind of this is why I think the conversations about mental health, like life is tough, like man up, you know. This is very, I think this is kind of the perception that people have. So like if you talk about your like mental health, like something is wrong with you, or like you're weak. And it's I think this is the what we have in common, like in Indian culture and Eastern European culture. Yeah, so this is my take on like different perspective and different like stigmas around mental health in two different countries.
Thank you, Mila. See, like I'm only on page 1 of page 3 on our conversation, and we're almost like an hour into this. And so that just tells you the breadth of the conversation that we're having. So while I get into the next piece, I'm just going to throw a poll for everybody. It's really about your access to mental health, and I'll just talk a little bit while you guys are doing the poll. It's interesting because even though I come from an East Indian heritage, I never actually grew up in India. I've been around in Africa, in the Middle East, Europe, and Canada. And Mila, you're right to say that like the North American culture seems to be more prevalent in talking about things. And I can tell you this because when, and not necessarily my parents, but my family in general they were trying to put me into a box. You can either be an engineer or a doctor, or there's no other option for it. It's either these two. And I chose to go into architecture. And it was criminalistic is the word that I will use for that, because that meant I'm actually paving the way for other people to rebel and change. Now, since I stepped into the world of architecture, we've had 3 architects in the family. We've had people go into psychology and different journalism and different aspects. But then it all comes back to me even now saying that you're the one who put them in this field. And I go like, yeah, but there's nothing wrong with them being in the field. But the mainstream piece is you're not an engineer or a doctor. And that's really where some of the culture pieces start pushing into that pressure component. And I'd say that I'm more successful than a lot of the engineers and doctors in my own family, because many of them are still studying, and they're like 40, 50 years old, and they're still studying. And so that's really starting this whole piece around, putting into a box and then putting a lot of pressure on people. So I relate with everything that you're saying. And things that I took from this was that, as a child, as you're growing up, it makes a huge difference to actually build them up from the top. And that's why we're supporting the Alberta Children's Hospital Foundation, because we're actually building a center for children and adolescent mental health, so that you can actually build kids up to being able to talk about this more. So it's nice that how this conversation led into that component. And so I know that we're a little bit strapped for time, but I think it's a conversation that we're still going to keep going over. And I want to really start discussing the nitty-gritty part of this thing, is to discuss the challenges. And we're going to start with you, Richa. So in order for us to progress on mental health issues, we need to think strategically about our challenges that we're facing and the factors that have a great influence on mental health, particularly those that affect young people. This part of the discussion is intended to help understand some of those challenges and factors and begin thinking how to address them. So at a very high level, what do you feel are the challenges and the factors that we should consider as we step into progressing on mental health? Richa, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah. I think the first is making it mainstream. I think working on the stigma, which will definitely come with education. How do you sort of make it mainstream, right? It's okay to seek support. Tell people, okay, if I have a fever or I have some other disease, it's okay to go out and talk about it, right? I have a headache, I will go out and talk about it. Similarly, how could be, I'm not feeling okay, I think I should go and seek support from a professional. I think that should be normalized as it could be. I think that is one. And I'm talking about educating at all levels, right? From the children to elderlies, I think all the spectrum needs to be educated. So there could be courses, there could be just the discussions around it more, so that people understand this is an important topic. Second is also making it accessible. At least in India, we know there are, we would know some the best of the cardiologists in the country, or a good surgeon. We would hardly know about any mental health professional. I think hardly anybody, I think like Mila was mentioning, would know even what is a psychologist versus a counselor versus a coach versus a psychiatrist. To them, all of them are, to most of us, all of them are same thing. And it all deals with mentally ill people, which might not be the case. right? So I think how do you make it accessible? How do you make it easily available? Also, I think the number of experts that we have in the country, see, it boils down to the same thing, right? If there is going to be more demand, there's going to be more supply. So there's a lot of media coverage that there's less supply. However, if you look at the numbers of the people actually graduating and who could be the potential supply is much higher. But because there is no demand, they don't end up pursuing that career option as they would otherwise, right? So I think stigma, or if you call it more education to spread awareness about it, I think that is definitely one of the challenge. Accessibility, availability being another challenge. Yeah, and I think also I think somewhere the cost associated with it, like at some places we could mental health. First of all, there is so stigma. Then to actually take some people who actually take that step to go out and seek support, it's also expensive, right? Much less expensive as it would be in Canada or UK or any other developed nation, but still it's expensive, right? So, and like how some other countries have the system of insurance covering it as a part of it, EAPs being there for the organizations, support being available at the campuses and schools, colleges, etc., should be enabled, which we don't have. Like very recently, I think last week, IRDA has published actually saying that mental health should be a part of the insurance policy, but it isn't till now, right? In fact, in India, we do not even have a very good regulatory system. So I think those are also some of the hindrances. But so again, going back to, I think, stigma, which could, I think awareness could help solve it. Accessibility, availability becomes second important things, or second and third. And then how could, I mean, costs need not always be the person paying it. Can there be other systems so that it encourages more people to come out and seek support, right? It could be in schools, colleges, as EAP programs, as a part of insurance policy, etc.
Okay.
So those are some of the challenges that I do see.
Okay. Thank you very much, Richa. I'm going to go to Mila to try and give us her perspective on this component around what are the challenges and factors that we should consider as we progress in mental health.
Well, I think that the factor that we have to consider, especially now, it's self-isolation. Because, like, let's admit it, it's been 6 months, 5 months, and it's not natural for us to spend hours either, like, if you still kind of have your job and you're able to do your job online, to spend like hours staring in your screen. Even though, like, I remember first month when I started it, well, I used to facilitate. Like, I love like the classroom feeling, and I started to miss my colleagues, this like small talks in the office, all this like small parts. And I understood that, okay, so my extrovert part is really, really suffering. So I can only imagine how it looks like if you have children, if you have, like, you know, extended family living like with you. So I think it's really, really, really a challenge, because it's the first time in modern history we're all kind of locked down in our homes, or it's not kind of our natural habitat per se, because I can only imagine how many health like mental health issues we would say if like this thing is over, or maybe this thing is never over. So this is really what we should consider. So how we can continue connecting in a meaningful way, because we're just wired for connection. This is how our you know, brains work. Also, Richa touched on a really important topic, and it's accessibility to services. So how we can make it more accessible, safe, because, for instance, I'm thinking about youth in particular. Not everyone has a very supportive family. So I think, and I can tell you because I work from like with people from like different ages. So like it's a fact that it's really hard to change someone's mind if you like past like certain age. I'm sorry, it's not ageism. This is just a fact. So it's easier to address some, you know, negative thinking, some like beliefs when you're younger than older, and all therapists will back up me on that. So really, I think that it's really important to give parents access to education and ability to learn some healthy parenting strategies. So we do not, so we can provide more opportunities and and avoid some unhealthy behaviors, because it's way easy to address it on an early stage than later on in life. So I think because early life experiences are forming us, so really it should be focused on like parenting strategies and working with schools. So because we should, like, again, holistic approach, we're all in this together. So it's really important to have accessibility and have like everyone on board.
Thank you, Mila. Pratap, your 2 cents on this?
Yeah, thank you. I think Richa and Mila have certainly highlighted, I think, the aspects of the facilities and the avenues by which people can actually tap into getting help and support. I want to bring in a slightly different dimension here, which is I look at it as in a couple of ways. One is the curative, and the other is the preventative. I like to look at it that way. That's just a perspective. And I think I completely agree with both Richa and Mila. Like, you know, they've touched upon the curative aspects of having accessibility, making it easier, available, cost effective. And then the preventative aspect that Mila went into in terms of looking at it from a parenting side of things, where how do you start to inculcate the right kind of habits, the right kind of mindset. And I want to focus more on the preventative aspect. So there is a certain aspect of that toughness that I think is required in terms of what I would say is mental fortitude. That's what I would like to focus on, right? The aspect of being able to build mental strength, because we're talking about health, we're talking about being healthy. It's the ability to be able to not just live a healthy life, but be able to counter or be able to withstand quite easily what we call the pressures of life, or what we call things that may affect us adversely. So I think there's an aspect of building mental fortitude that I like to discuss a little bit. And I think the aspect of parenting and early childhood life is particularly important, because from the ages of up to 5 or up to 7 is when children or human beings are at their most absorbent, most sort of vulnerable state of being able to be molded as individuals. So this is why typically, no matter, unless you're very, very strongly ingrained into the university or the college or the school that you go into, a lot of your values, etc., are shaped at home. And this is, and looking at it from multiple dimensions, it's the physical side of things, your physical health. What do you go into, and, you know, are you exercising? No one has to go and become a bodybuilder or an athlete, but you can still have a good level of health, physical health, which supports your mental health systems. And I think there's a massive correlation between physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, you know, all these aspects are very, very closely interrelated. So simply having a bad day at work, stepping out, taking a walk, or going for a jog can have a drastic impact on how you come back and, you know, face a situation. So I think what I'd like to focus on more in this particular answer is, let's start to look at also preventative aspects. So there's a significant part of the population that's going through it right now, and they need the curative solutions. But let's start to look at where do they originate from. And a lot of it comes and stems from, I have to admit it, just like Mila, parents who may be imprinting their version of how life is, or their version of how challenges should be overcome, onto their children. And this is not knocking any parent or blaming anyone. It's simply that everyone does the best they can with the resources they have at a certain point in time. But having the awareness that there are more resources available, there are other ways to think, may help you start to look at exposing your children or your people under your care to more avenues of looking at things. And this is not to say that just because you don't have the answer, it makes you any less of a parent or any less of a guardian or any less of a teacher or any less of a friend. It just means that you are cognizant of the fact that you recognize this situation, or you find that, hang on, even before such situations come about, what resources would you give someone to be able to build up what we call mental fortitude? And that's another angle I think we need to look at as well.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for some. I know that there's a lot more challenges that we're going to be facing. I'm just cognizant of the time. We've just got about 19 minutes left, and I really want to stick to the time frame, even though this conversation is going to go through for quite some time. But all of you said something that was relevant, and I could really understand. I'll talk a little bit about the accessibility part towards the end as we wind down. But something that Pratap mentioned was about that imprinting on parents, and it kind of brought a story to my mind that I just wanted to share. And it touches about one of the challenges as well that I think we face is around as we are looking at our population. There is that piece of people starting to identify themselves in different sexual orientations, whether they are lesbian, gay, bisexual, the LGBTQ2 plus components into things. And I know I brought this up as a conversation where my now 8-year-old son, when he was about 6 or 5, I was going like having a conversation with my wife then to have this conversation around, okay, what if my son grows up and he says he wants to be bisexual, or he wants to he's gay, and her immediate reaction was, oh, that cannot happen, we need to take him to church, and we got to change that concept. But that was because of lack of awareness of what that actually means. And in the 3 years or 2 years since then, she's exposed herself to a lot of those components, and she's going like, okay, this is not actually a disease, it is how they're identifying themselves. And we play a role as parents to help support the kids in those things. Now, not saying that it happens, but it was a good learning to understand that, you come from you come with an outlook to something, and then you take that awareness, which all of you have been talking about, is about that education and awareness component. And once that comes inside, your thought process changes. And I find that's a huge part in actually growing yourself into being there, because now you're there to support your child to step into a world of unknown, and that makes a change in the way that they are actually going to grow up. So with that point, I'm going to go into the next question, is what can we do to support people, and in particular younger people? And I'm going to start with Mila on this topic. Is what are things, I know that you're doing work with the newcomers, but your thoughts on a more generalistic level, especially around support pieces that we can put into place.
Okay, I think that I touched base a little bit when I was talking about challenges that and factors that we should consider. So with youth, and again, I'm looking, I'm kind of assessing what I've seen in like community that I work with. So for instance, especially with immigrants, because parents, they're faced with a really challenging situation, because they have to parent in two cultures. And this is, I think, that is really essential to address. So for instance, I think that the programs who help parents to make better kind of decisions in their parenting, they're really helpful, because as I mentioned before, like our early life experience, they form us, because like if you go into therapy, you will be talking about your parents, like no questions asked, like you will have to address it. So I think it's really important to catch this at a really early stage, and I think it goes along with the preventative approach, because it's way better to address it with the people who are responsible for bringing up children. So it's either parents or school teachers. My next point would be accessible mental health help in all schools. And because like not everyone has a supportive family. So the youth, they should have the opportunity and they should know what services are available, and they should know that it's okay to be not okay, and know what are some resources in the community. I don't know if mental health kind of basics are covered in a curriculum in Canada. I heard in different schools it varies, but I think it's a really great way to to show children and youth that it's okay if you have a counselor available in school. So I think it will be a great way to normalize this. Okay, so if you have some issues, some conflicts, and so it's better to start with school then, if parents, they're not really supportive, or like they don't know, it's maybe the concept is foreign to them, so they will say, oh, like again, it comes down to stigma. So I think it's really important to talk about mental health in schools from an early age.
Okay. Thank you, Mila. And I think that's why when we ever enter a counselor, they always start with the question is, tell us about your childhood, so that you can actually go back to blaming the parents always on things. Again, like as Pratap said, it's not about blaming, it's the experience that you've gone through. Pratap, on to you to this question.
Sure. See, I think, like I talked about, I think people from a very young age, they're very impressionable. Therefore, it's important that the right, I suppose, balanced set of impressions are shared amongst individuals. So I think it's very important to look at education from a systemic perspective. And that is, by that I mean the parenting involved there, the school systems that they go to, the kind of hobbies or interests that they're encouraged to take on. Yes, there's an awareness piece of it, but I think one other aspect to also say is that when raising the aspect of mental health, it's not just to say that this person may suffer from this, that person may suffer from this. It's more around looking at it as a something that can affect anyone's perspectives, not just a certain set of individuals, because that then leads to certain kind of profiling in some cases. And what I would encourage that in younger children to raise the awareness of is, when you go through any sort of so-called trauma or even abuse in some cases, it can take a number of forms. And I think educating them about what kind of what shapes and sizes this can take almost raises their perspectives as to what this might look like. And then also, not just to educate them, but also tell them, what do you do in such scenarios? What happens if you find yourself in this scenario? What happens if you find someone else who you know around you is suffering from this? How could you help them? How could you be a better mentor or a support system for them? I think raising those points right from when they're young develops not just the competitive aspect of, I'd like you to be good at this and get to excellence in this, but also, if there's someone else who's suffering, or who is perhaps suffering in silence, more importantly, how do you start to develop that muscle of compassion? Because that is a different way of thinking. I don't want just myself to win or my own friends to win. I want everyone to be uplifted as a community. Therefore, it's important for me to be able to understand how to listen better to people. And this is something we talk about in our own courses. There are three kinds of people who listen. Someone who listens because they're just waiting for another person to stop talking. Someone who listens because they want to find a hole in the argument. And a third kind of listener who's actually trying to understand where someone is coming from. And understand why they're saying what they're saying. So I think helping someone go through that the early stages of understanding how coaching conversations can happen, how mentoring can happen, starts to build that muscle of compassion in younger people. I think that's something that could also be added into the mix.
Okay. Thank you, Pratap. Richa, your thoughts on this?
I completely agree. I think with the whole aspect of bringing this awareness from very young age, from your schools, from your colleges, and I think all stakeholders, right? Not just for the person himself, like the child himself, but also the parent, the teacher, the caretaker, um, all of it, right? I think it should definitely be there. I also think, I think Mila touched upon that, that it should be a part of curriculum also, where we are putting in so much effort into physics, chemistry, maths. Can we also put in some effort into life skills, because that is what get used the most, right? How could you help build that muscle, or have build that strength in the individual, right? So that they're more resilient. They can see none of the great grades will matter if they can't handle conflict, they can't handle resolution, they can't handle stress well, right? So I think that is what our whole education should focus on. Everything else, if they are in the best state of the mind, they could figure out and learn and proceed further with. So I think definitely those elements of both promotive mental health and curative, saying first of all, like good practices, right? Gratitude, yoga, meditation, some relaxation techniques, so that they know from a scientific angle why it is important. Why should I do it, right? So I think that is definitely one of the things that I strongly believe. At least I know from a fact that in our curriculums it's missing. Even if it's there, it's just there for the namesake, because and nobody really thinks about it, right? And you don't want anybody to be teaching these curriculum. You really want people who are practitioners, who are from this field, who really have the knowledge, because a lot of people just, again, for the sake of it, it's an easy topic, let's just go and talk about it, right? I think curriculum and educating, again, all stakeholders, because honestly, like, because we run an organization which is all about mental health, right? Almost on an everyday basis, we see 10 red flags. Red flag for us are severe cases. These are somebody could harm themselves, they are suicidal. Somebody could harm someone else's, like homicidal, or requires an immediate psychiatric intervention, because we do not prescribe medication. And most of the time, when we raise a flag to a family member, they're like, oh, they would just stop talking to us. They'll be like, no, no, nothing has happened to my child, or my son or my daughter, right? They don't need you. We have resolved our conflict and that person is fine. I think that 360-degree educating of all stakeholders, so that we create an environment which is healthy, which is collaborative, which promotes a good mental health, is important. I think Pratap did touch upon that. We call it emotional first aid. We keep doing a lot of these trainings as well. Saying how maybe if I fall down, I would know how to do a basic band-aid, right? Clean the wound, put a Dettol, do a basic band-aid, and then if required, go to an emergency room. Similarly, as human beings, do we know, first of all, how to identify that someone might need help, right? Because they might not be in the frame of mind to actually come out, say that they need help. Can as a peer, can as a just the neighbor next door, as a parent, as a teacher, as anybody, right? As a co-worker, can I know that looks like, can I identify that the behaviors have changed, certain things have happened, and this person might require support, right? And how do I offer that basic level of first aid to that person, right? Before I say, okay, this can go to the professional. So I think I look at it from that perspective, saying, I think if these are the things that are available, we would have a much healthier and a happier society.
Okay. Thank you, Richa. And I know that we're towards the end of the conversation here. I just want to bring up one of the questions that Arpita put up in the Zoom group chat, which was, and I'd say that let's have that a little bit of a conversation around that component, because we've talked about it. If you had to leave the audience with a couple of tips on how to handle a situation where somebody comes to you and tells you that they have a mental health issue, what are some of the things that you could actually say to help? And I get this, because many of us are not counselors or professionals, but we have friends that come to us and say, I'm struggling with this, and you don't want to necessarily say something that might even jeopardize the situation. So from your experience, I think this is a valid question to ask, is how could you help that person yet be able to not push them into a zone which, Richa, you mentioned the red flag zone, essentially, where you start thinking, okay, was that the right thing or not? So it's a free for all. Anybody who wants to answer, raise your hand and we can get started with you. Who wants to go first? Okay, Richa's going up.
So I think very good question. Thank you, Arpita, for asking that. So I would probably answer it in two parts, right? I think here what she's mentioned is that the person has directly come and said this, which is great. A lot of times, like I said, the person will not say this also, right? You might identify certain signs. So if you could learn about some of those signs, which could be that the person is very agitated, irritated, loss of appetite, being all alone most of the times, crying, even talking about things like, my maybe life after death is better, or things along those lines. Those are some of the signs to watch out for, right? I think the next thing to do is actually to talk to them about. I think one of the things a lot of people actually end up saying is, what if I talk, like I'm saying, we do work with a lot of institutes, and every year whenever we want to do any suicide prevention awareness, a lot of these directors and HR folks at corporates will say, don't use that word. It will make people to commit suicide, right? That's not how it works. So I think just having that very honest conversation that, what happened? Is there something that I could help you with? Is there something you want to talk about? And just being there for them, listening to them. And if you understand that you might not be the right person, that's completely okay. Actually, giving them certain resources. Hey, I know this therapist, or I know, there is a organization like that. Why don't you talk to them? I can facilitate that for you. I think that might be effective.
Okay. Thank you, Richa.
Definitely.
Pratap, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to come in there. I think those are some really helpful, simplistic, and I think very effective as well at the same time. What you just said, Richa. I don't think I have much more to add there, except for the fact that I think going into the mode of, there may be a mode of, previously, by looking at people who may have gone through this, you may find yourself, if you're not trained enough, of course, in some ways, we're getting to a judgmental mode as opposed to just trying to understand them. I think that's where the questions of asking things like, so tell me a little bit more about your experience and how this has happened, and showing and being genuinely interested in where the person is coming from, and also asking them about, is there anything I can do to help at this stage? Because then you're actually getting them into the solution mode, as opposed to, and this is not just jumping into that question straight away, but I'm kind of going off of what Rich has just said, which is exploring those things first, getting them more open and talking, because it's a big deal that someone has actually firstly come to you and said this to you. Not many people do that, because a lot of people like to find their own solutions, especially with the digital age. They like to, even doctors these days say they have to think a lot about giving solutions, because a lot of people come with, doctor, I need this. So, I already have the solution. Tell me, I need your prescription, as opposed to, coming to them for some advice. So I think people who come to you, it might actually be that you have given off a vibe or a sense of approachability to someone, which is definitely a very welcome thing that you've done with your presence, with your previous statements, with your profile. So I think it's important to use that position with a sense of responsibility, and being able to get them to open up more, and then towards the end saying, is there anything I can do to help, or what have you done to sort of look at helping? And I think I come back to Mila's point there. What can you do now? Right? What can we do now with this? And so being more of that collaborative, saying we're in this together, as opposed to, oh, I think you need to do, trying to be a solution person at that point is perhaps not the best idea in my books. I think approaching this collaboratively will be the way to go.
I think I would just add, sorry, Alex, if I could just add for 10 seconds. I think Pratap did mention one good point, right? I think one of the things we've always heard people telling, in fact, today also we were doing one of these sessions, is I feel the fact that somebody has opened up to me and asked me for something, I have to give that solution to them, right? And I start scratching my head, you should do this, 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 this. This is what has worked for someone. This is what should work for you. You're not, your job is not to do that. That's not what they're looking for. I think your job is to just be there for them, listen to them, and it's okay, right? You can always have a professional support which can help them, guide them better about whatever it is. Right? Being a mentor, being somebody compassionate and wanting to help doesn't necessarily always equate to that you have to give a solution. Right? So I think I just wanted to add to that.
No, thank you, Richa. I want to give Mila a chance to speak up if she has anything more to add to this.
Yeah, well, I think that Pratap and Richa, they covered this all. And I want to emphasize that if someone comes to you and says that they have a mental health issue, like, this is just amazing, because I had like opposite situations. I had a client who was like really like suicidal. And I was like, I had really hard time in convincing him to see a therapist, because again, stigma exists. So I think it's really important to thank this person for being honest and for trusting you, because I don't know, like, especially in different culture, it's really a big deal to admit and tell someone, even if it's your close friend, that they have some problems. So, and also I really like how Richa touched on like not taking like full responsibility for other person's kind of actions and decisions. So you can initiate a discussion and well, listen to the problem, but it's really important to set like boundaries, because there is sometimes it's very little that you can do. Like, for instance, person will tell you that they have this issue, but they're just refusing to seek some help. So it's really it's really hard to do. But I mean, but you just can you know, explore the issue with the persons, thank them for being honest and trusting you, and maybe try to find out some solution, because, well, depending on the issue, because, well, maybe you're a friend of this person, but you're not trained, like you don't know like how to do it. And yeah, so this is what someone can do to address this situation.
Okay. Thank you, Mila. And I know that we're just crossed the 10:30 mark. I'm just going to ask for 2 more minutes from everybody. I will throw out the poll, the final one that's there just for you guys. But I really wanted to take this time while you guys are doing the poll just to talk a little bit about what my intent is with my company and how we're going to move this conversation forward. So first of all, thank you to Mila, Pratap, and Richa. This has been an amazing conversation. It's been really the beginning of something that's big, but I really thank you very much for your time and putting in the effort to come in and have this conversation. I think I personally learned a lot. I've been writing notes, and there's a lot of things that I'm going to take back. But for everybody else, I just want to let you know that this is just the start of a conversation. And as I'm going to build this out, we're going through 3 stages. What we are doing right now is inspiration, which is about talking about the topic, trying to understand it from different lenses, and get a better understanding of what are the challenges that we are facing in terms of mental health. And soon after that, we're going to be talking with a facilitated discussion with people in the medical industry, with organizations and so on, to see their perspective on what their challenges are. And so once we identify the challenges, we go into the next stage, which is called ideation, which is to put those challenges and actually come up with solutions. So there's an opportunity for everybody that's on this conversation, not just the panelists, but people to say, if there's a question that's come out, what do you think your normal idea, your normal solution might be to this? We don't need high-tech solutions sometimes for things. We just need to be able to look at it from a realistic perspective to understand what are things that we can do to solve the challenges. When we talk about innovation, people tend to go through, oh, there needs to be a tech solution for it. And really, there doesn't need to be a tech solution for it. The tech might be an outcome at the end of the day, but some of the solutions are simply like having a conversation or changing a process or something very simple at times. And as humans, our go-to is always to try and process everything out and try and, even if we have to have a conversation with somebody that's difficult, we tend to try and put a process in place so that we don't have that conversation that's happening. So the ideate phase is about coming up with solutions, and then we go into the implementation stage, whereas we're going to take some of those ideas and actually go into prototyping and actually building solutions that can be used by people and organizations. And that's where we talked a little about the accessibility to support systems. So my company is focusing on starting this discussion, but we're also going to be partnering with a number of organizations. Like this conversation itself already sparked an interest today. Just before it started off, I had a email coming from the North America Mental Illness Institute, actually saying, whoa, would you like to start partnering? We want to hear more things about you and where you're going with this. So to me, this is the starting step to a bigger discussion. And Pratap, you talked a little bit about this, about the neural pathways. In September, we actually have Charles Odura coming in to actually talk to us about neurodiversity and how that component is going to fit into mental health. And when he and I were talking about it, we just talked about a show like the Big Bang Theory. Most of you know about Big Bang Theory, but you got Sheldon Cooper that is on the spectrum of neurodiversity, where he's got Asperger's. But he looks awkward, he talks awkward, he behaves awkward. Do we consider that as mental health? No, but they're very smart, brilliant people that have a lot of things that they can contribute back to society. But we as normal people look at things that are different and think about it in a weird way. And this is about starting that discussion around looking at things like neurodiversity and bringing that into components. And so in September, like September 18th is the day that we're looking at it. We're going to having a discussion with Charles. And then in October, we're going to be having a discussion with Vish Chatterjee, who's actually a known author and an entrepreneur. But he stepped into the world of mental health, and he's actually a speaker that brings an Ayurvedic approach to mental health. And he talks about the 3 doshas of Ayurveda and how they come into existence. So you can see that the diversity of mental health and how we're trying to get different pieces together. We're also working on getting some clinical psychologists and counselors on board to have the next panel discussion as we start talking it from their perspective on what it means to come into things. So this is all about starting that topic, and we're really trying to end that stigma. So I'd like to thank again all of you for being part of this discussion and taking on such an important topic that is required, especially in times of when we're going through a global crisis, financial crisis. People have lost jobs. They're going through COVID, but I see that more as an opportunity to now step up and start this conversation. So to all the participants, the panelists, thank you very much for coming in. Any last comments from the panelists?
Yeah, something for me, I think it's been an engaging dialogue. So I'd loved hearing the multiple opinions and dimensions of the topic. And I think I'm very encouraged by the fact that where you're taking this, Dino, is more along the lines of actually uncovering multiple facets. I think this is what we need, and such dialogues are exactly what this sort of movement or this kind of philosophy of understanding what this is about comes into. I think it can be it's very, very interesting when you build in multiple aspects that contribute to the same root cause. So I'd be very interested in knowing more about, where you're going with this. I'd love to contribute as well, because there are a number of angles when you look at it from a holistic perspective. A holistic perspective has multiple angles to it. So that's why it needs so many more people in the dialogue. So I think this is the right way to go. And thank you for starting this.
I have a comment from Arpita about whether this will be made available. So yes, we are recording this session, and I'll be going through my YouTube channel, which is Next Evolution Ventures. If you guys want to see some of the other panels that have happened on business continuity and so on, it's there on that YouTube channel. Though the first few weeks, I'm going to try and monetize it. So because we are trying to support the Alberta Children's Foundation, so it will be through donations first, but later on in the year we're going to make this available to everyone. So yes, this is about a conversation that needs to reach far and wide, and so it's not going to stick to this arena, it's going to go beyond that. Mila, Richa, any last comments?
Yeah. So I just wanted to thank you, Philip, for starting this conversation. It's really exciting for me to be part of this initiative. And my last comment, because I was like thinking, so we're talking about mental health. So I think we should switch the narrative. So mental health is health. So we're not ashamed to talk about, I don't know, diabetes or like heart disease. So I think mental health is just a normal conversation that we need to have. So I hope that we will accomplish great things.
I'm looking forward to that. Richa?
So thank you, Alex, for starting this. I think it's definitely a movement. I think it'll encourage a lot more. It'll help encourage to normalize the conversation and encourage more people to come out and seek support. I think the last thing I want to end with, I think I've said that before, but if we can encourage more people to understand we are all humans. Humans are vulnerable. We all go through ups and downs in our life, and it's completely okay to seek support, right? Like Mila said, it's okay not to be okay, right? Seek support not because you're weak, seek support because you're strong.
Okay. So with that, I thank you, everyone. I know we've gone beyond time, but I think it was a conversation that needs to be done, and no amount of time is going to help us stop with where this conversation would go. So I do invite you all to be part of the conversation as we go through the rest of the year. And I definitely will be in contact with you as we start looking at how do we move to the next stage of making this movement something that's more than just a conversation, but actually moving things to action. So thank you everyone for participating, and I will definitely be in touch with you all with when these links are going to be up and running, and as well as being part of the conversation. So with that, I'm going to stop our recording, and thank you very much.